My name's Steve Mignano. I play guitar and I sing. My current project's working with Garguts and also Drab. And I play some other gigs as well, sort of as a hired gun playing guitar.
Okay. And so we're in Algiers now. Where did you grow up?
I grew up outside of Toledo, Ohio, actually, way up north. And music's always been kind of a part of my life because my dad played in bands when I was a kid. And he owned a little guitar store in Blissfield, Michigan when I was real little. And like my earliest memories are kind of like crawling around on the floor of his guitar store, hearing him and his friends talk about guitar, play guitar. So it's kind of like, I feel like it's my first language in a way.
Sure.
Like my literally earliest memories are seeing guitar, hearing guitar. So
yeah,
it kind of came naturally later on.
Yeah. What kind of music was he into?
He was into all different kinds of stuff, which was cool because we had an awesome record collection at home. You know, everything from like country to jazz to a lot of rock and blues and that kind of thing. A lot of roots music.
Yeah.
And he was a very good guitar player too. So.
Yeah. So you were hearing music 24/7 pretty much.
24/7. Yeah.
When I was a little kid, my dad he liked to hunt, so he had a van, but it didn't have seats in the back or nothing. It was for his camping and hunting gear and stuff. But he had 2 home stereo speakers, 2 captain's chairs, and the beanbag chair was mine. So I would sit between the 2 home stereo speakers, and he had figured out a way to put a Radio Shack amp in the dash, you know, so he could crank it up. So like, you know,
nice.
Doobie Brothers and James Taylor and Zeppelin, who knows who else, you know.
Yeah, it sounds like some good father-son time for sure.
Yeah, right. Less words, more rock. But so it was always around me too, at home and traveling and things like that, you know. Did he kind of encourage or steer you in any way towards any of the things that he was doing like typical fathers do, you know?
We were very encouraged, but it was never in like an unnatural or forced way at all. It was more like if we took an interest in it, you know. My parents were very, very encouraging of it.
I would imagine it didn't take you very long to start into that.
No, it was just all available. It was all there. So I think what really lit the fire, and I've heard this from a lot of guitar players that are around my age, is like when you saw Back to the Future the first time, Michael J. Fox plays Johnny B. Goode at the end. Yeah. Which is still like, you know, it's like one of the coolest scenes in any movie ever. Yeah. But I think when I was 7 or 8 years old and I saw that, I'm like, you know, that was it. I had to play guitar. So yeah.
That's funny though, because you bring up another aspect of it. When you're hearing it at home, let's say on the radio, or your dad's playing it some, maybe it makes it more approachable. But the rock star status that kind of comes with it, you didn't see it sensationalized until you were looking at it in the movie, so it became something else.
When you see it in that context, it's like superhero shit.
Right.
It's like larger than life.
Yeah, that's funny. Because there are a lot of people, like you pointed out, coming up that are now musicians. Somebody in their family played, they got exposed at an early age and things of that nature. But to many people, they just hear it on the radio or they see it on TV, and they don't assimilate or equate these people playing music with something that they could. It's not as easily approached or visualized when you don't see maybe one of your peers or parents or somebody playing some sort of instrument. You know what I'm saying? You had access to it at an early age, so it just kind of felt natural. How early on did you start playing?
I think I first picked it up. I asked my dad for lessons when I was about 7, and he got me started on learning Johnny B. Goode.
Nice.
I think I learned part of the intro, but at that point, it was just a little bit too hard for me physically to play well.
Yeah.
And also, you know, I was 7, I had ADHD, and I was running all over and playing sports and everything. So I kind of put it on the shelf, and I came back to it when I was maybe 11 or 12 and got really serious about it. Yeah. And then by the time I was 15 or 16, I was practicing a lot per day, you know. And I guess partly because my dad, you know, kind of coaching me along. You know, back then we didn't have internet or YouTube, so you couldn't really like. Now it's kind of awesome because you can look up a YouTube tutorial, whatever you want to learn, and you know it's like right there. Yeah. But I guess partly because of my dad and some other really good guitar players in town, I had like some accelerated learning as far as guitar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Johnny B. Good and Michael J. Fox stuff, that was around 7 years old too?
Probably, yeah. Yeah, 6 or 7, something like that.
Yeah. But I would imagine it's something that you never forgot, because you were connecting two worlds right then and there. I mean, it's not as significant for a 7-year-old. He's like, whoa. But, you know, looking back, it seems like two things kind of converging for a moment. You know?
Yeah, after I saw that, I used to run around the house like air guitaring. You know,
right.
Really getting into it. And then, you know, then I picked up the guitar and started to learn. I'm like, okay, this is really hard.
Yeah.
It's not as easy as he makes it look in the movies. So.
Bet.
Yeah.
Were you seeing any live shows, like, by the time you were early teen?
Some. Mostly my dad was in a bunch of different local bands, and, you know, we'd go see that and stuff. And then,
So that was pre-teen then?
Yeah, exactly. And then I think when I was like 11 or 12, I started going to a couple concerts. I saw Soundgarden, I think I saw Megadeth, and I saw the big one. I saw Rage Against the Machine when I was like 16 at the Palace of Auburn Hills in Detroit. And something about the energy of that show was like really intense.
Yeah.
You know?
You picked up on that, huh?
Yeah, basically where I grew up, we had like 3 radio stations, you know. Again, this was like pre-internet, so, you know, access was sort of limited to whatever was available.
Yeah.
So we had the classic rock station, 104.7. You had Buzz 106.5, which is like the modern rock alternative station, and then like the pop station, which is 92.5 or whatever, where they'd be playing like Mariah Carey and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I'd bounce between the classic rock station and the modern rock station, and that in, you know, my formative years of getting into music and really getting serious about guitar, that, you know, that's where my influences came from.
Yeah,
you know?
sure.
So it'd be Zeppelin, AC/DC, Sabbath, etc. You know, and then the modern stuff too. Soundgarden, I was really into, Metallica.
Yeah.
You know, Alice in Chains, bands like that. So when I started really sitting down and learning guitar, that's what I wanted to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The album collection at the house, was that pretty much some of the same, the classic rock, like the Zeppelins and things like that, or did they have folk music in there too, because your dad was kind of into that stuff?
All kinds, man. I still have some of my parents' records, and
Nice.
I remember when I first latched on the blues, when I was like in my teen years, you know, the records were sort of like alphabetical, and I remember I saw there's B.B. King live at Cook County Jail right next to Roy Buchanan, a Coke of Roy Buchanan compilation.
Yeah.
And I remember listening to those 2 albums back to back, and that's what set me off on this like blues binge.
Okay.
And Roy Buchanan in particular, there's something about on that album, you know, The Messiah Will Come Again and Sweet Dreams, which are like these guitar ballads that were just like haunting. And I remember that record was slightly warped. So it had like this warble to it, which made it even creepier a little, or like even more haunting.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just fortunate that I had all of that buffet of music to get into, dig into, and it never seemed weird to me to be into that and also into fucking Megadeth. You know, like there wasn't that much of a disconnect for me. You know, if it had cool guitar riffs, I was there. You know?
That's funny. I could see how you would appreciate variety because of your father, but it's something totally different to incorporate Megadeth into that pool. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I think back then, again, we had tab books, you know?
Yeah.
And what was funny is if somebody saved up like $15 and bought a tab book, it would become like public property among your friends.
Sure.
Like you'd pass it around, and then, you know, months later, you'd get it back from a friend that you didn't give it to, you know? And the pages would be wrinkled or whatever. But I think the first 2 tab books that I bought were Nirvana in Utero and Countdown to Extinction, Megadeth. I learned all the Nirvana stuff, but I'm still struggling with Marty Friedman solos on Megadeth. So
yeah, I bet.
That's very top shelf guitar playing.
Yeah.
On that, so.
Did you kind of run any of this by your father, since he was like the genesis for your musical pilgrimage, if you will? Like coming back saying, "Dad, have you heard of Megadeth?" Or did you not think he would be into that sort of thing? I mean, it's a bit extreme. He wasn't listening to extreme forms of music.
No, he I think he got it. Like some of it he liked, and maybe didn't let on that he liked it because he didn't, you know, he was trying to be a dad, you know.
Right. That's funny.
But he never like tried to steer me away from it. And he's like, yeah, if that's what you're into. And I think he could appreciate it from a musical standpoint. Like if he hears a really fucking kick-ass metal guitar solo, he's gonna be like, that's some good playing.
Yeah.
So even if he would be very blunt about what he liked and what he didn't like.
Sure.
But never tried to discourage it. So.
Right, not to refute anyone else's taste, I suppose.
Yeah.
So what started you off performance-wise playing in public?
I think the first time I played guitar in public in like a band setting was when I was in high school. I think my sophomore year of high school, the drum line that year was doing a Dream Theater show. Mm-hmm. They did Change the Seasons by Dream Theater. And they needed a guitar player in the pit because, you can't really do Dream Theater without guitar. It's guitar heavy music. Yeah. And obviously the production of the show was all about percussion and drums and stuff. But the town I grew up in rural Ohio, just to put it this way, my graduating class was 48 people. Okay. So we're talking about a tiny rural town. Sure. And I'm like the only kid who played guitar. Yeah. So I jumped at the chance to do it. They asked me to do it, and I jumped at the chance to it and learned this Dream Theater set, which if I remember correctly, I think he was using a 7-string guitar on that, so I had to tune my low E down to a low B. Uh-huh. And, it was challenging, for me at that age, but super fun. And that was a cool first time out because, I got to play for a decent sized audience because we'd play, the drum line would have to go to competitions and stuff and play in front of pretty big audiences, but I'd also get to kind of crank up the amp and like use a lot of, palm muting and chugs and distortion. Yeah. It wasn't like a lame, I'm playing in the school band kind of gig. It was Dream Theater. It was pretty cool. So that was exciting. Sure. Like I got to see the impact of loud guitar on my peers. Yeah. And all the high-fiving and stuff after. So
there was no trepidation on your part at any moment. Did you?
I was scared shitless like the first couple times. Yeah. But once you kind of jump into the deep end, and this is something I feel like I've learned about life from playing music, is like when you're standing in front of an abyss, and like there's nowhere to go, jump, and once you do it. You begin to realize, that's not so bad. Yeah. It's not going to kill you. Yeah. So it gives you courage. It gives you, more confidence. And then you come back and look at it and you can examine, I could do this better. Sure. This was awesome. That was my favorite part. And playing music is the most exhilarating thing in the world, man. And it starts with a spark. But, if you nurture that spark, it grows into a fire. And as I've gotten older, it hasn't diminished at all, man. It's just gotten more complex. It's like turning into this lotus flower of fire now. Sure. That one little spark. So. Yeah. Since
Dream Theater and the school band, you said that was your first time performing live, so I'm assuming you weren't in any kind of band of your own before then.
I had like we had like a garage band. Me and my buddies had like a garage band when I was in like 8th grade. Okay. And we used to practice in my buddy Evan's, his grandma's garage, and it was your typical garage band type of thing. We were playing a lot of covers, Sure. Smashing Pumpkins and Nirvana. We were really into punk rock too at that time. So we were playing like Black Flag and, stuff like that. And I remember for his birthday one year, his mom booked us some studio time, which we thought was like the most amazing thing ever. And we cut like a 2-song demo, Sweet. Yeah, so cool. And then for that summer, we were like the rock stars of the town. But we didn't play any shows because, we didn't have a drummer. Sure. So the dude at the studio, the recording engineer, played drums on the demo for us.
Gotcha.
And, so I didn't really have live performance experience until later on.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
The small town, was that a bit of a handicap when it came to recruiting friends to be able
big time. Yeah, big time.
Make a band? Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Especially because my friend group by high school, most of them went to a vocational school. Mm-hmm. I got pretty decent grades, and I was a little more academically inclined, and so my parents wanted me to go to like a private school. I didn't want to go to the private school, so I wound up kind of stuck back at public school without my group of friends.
Gotcha.
And which it wasn't all bad because I did become a little bit withdrawn, but I also got more into music as a result because I didn't have as many distractions, and you know, like none of the other kids at school were cool, so I didn't think so. I just, you know, started getting into old movies, getting into more records, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Did since you had those albums at home, because see, I had a similar experience, but my parents divorced when I was like 9. But, you know, I eventually inherited that record collection.
Yeah.
You know, stack like this. And now I've got a stack from here to that wall, 2 shelves, 3 shelves. Like it just kept going with me. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I felt like, and I mean, it's a common theme with me to kind of hold on to the past in some respects because I have more esteem for the way they did things, especially when you speak on music because, I mean, let's face it, a digital download is soulless compared to an album where you're looking at the inside of it and you could smell it, dude. You could see it. It was there when it happened. You know what I'm saying? And
totally.
It's an entity. It's a life unto itself. But so, did it cause you to? I guess did it instill any more respect in you for older music or you know, older views on how to make that music? Because I mean the recording, the technology and all of that stuff over the year changed as well, and you got to see a little bit of it to cut that demo, you know.
Totally.
But since then, I mean, so on the records is one style of recording and sound, and then your demo is another style of recording and sound, and like you're getting kind of like this lazy Susan full of things, and you know, band at school. Did it instill in you any sort of, I guess, respect or recognition for these different atmospheres in which music was created?
Absolutely. Like I'd say, when I interact with musicians that are younger than me, because I'm kind of in like this cusp age group, you know, well, somewhere between millennial and Gen X, like I can still remember the world pre-internet, and like my formative years began in that time period still. Sure. And so it makes a huge difference how music is recorded in the analog era versus the digital era.
Absolutely.
And for me anyway, really went downhill when everything started going digital.
Yeah.
You know? There was just much less good music, and the sonic quality of it to me was not as good.
Sure.
And that was one of the things I really insisted on with the Drab album, and one of the reasons why I appreciate Jack Mealy so much as a producer is that was the sonic quality I was trying to capture, you know. And it's hard to do now because, you know, a lot of those records were, you know, they were recorded to analog tape. Yeah. Which is like, in most situations, just not possible anymore. Yeah. But if you have the right people involved and they know how it should sound and what to do, and they know the right techniques as far as miking and stuff like that, you can still get that warm ambient sound where you can almost feel the room that the recording's made in.
I got you. Okay. Yeah. What was the name of that album for these guys?
The Drab album?
Yeah.
It's our self-titled album that we released about 1.5 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just called Drab.
Okay. And that's interesting too. I didn't expect such a well-rounded response to that, because I know I was kind of going off in different directions, but I was trying to capture the essence of kind of the old versus the new, or being able to recognize and perhaps duplicate or you know, emulate that in your work. You know, and like you're saying, it takes a lot to try and emulate something that you have a passion for, that comes from an era where it was all that they knew, you know. Yeah, I have a great deal of respect for that. I interviewed a band, Pocket Chocolate, and they've got a ton of members, like 9. They have a brass section and all this stuff. But so one of the guys in there had a real affinity for the recording style, where they would all get together in the same room at the same time. Nobody was isolated. Right. And they would all get together and record, and which is a challenge in itself for a 9-member band. But interesting for me to hear that coming from someone that, I mean, he's half my age. Right. And he's talking about his affection for albums that came out for his birth. Right. You know, but it's funny how deep musicians can go because they have this different lens on. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm sure since you played guitar, you recognize the guitar portions of albums and songs more so than others might have, because you knew what went into it and you knew what to look for it. You know what I'm saying?
Totally.
So, you know, kudos for that.
I feel lucky in a way that I'm still kind of anchored in that era.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, like, I'm glad I got to experience just the tail end of it, if nothing else, you know?
Sure. Well, pre-internet says enough.
Yep.
It says a lot. It's like you weren't safe from whatever virus that is. You
totally.
Know what I'm saying?
Yep.
That's funny. So, moving forward, you, I don't want to jump to Drab just yet because there's a big gap there. You, let's say after high school, you got your first experience live while in high school.
Yeah.
You had a garage band just before that. Between sophomore and senior in high school, did the garage band kind of grow or change or anything like that?
No, unfortunately, I just couldn't find anybody to play with in my town, really. So I became more focused on listening. And at that time, you know, you're thinking about what you want to do after high school, or you're thinking about, you know, trying to plan the rest of your life.
Sure.
as if you even have the means to do that at that age, you know.
Right.
You don't know what's going to happen. But I wanted to be a filmmaker at that time, so I was thinking about going to film school after high school and stuff, but was still really into music and playing guitar by myself. And then after I graduated high school, like literally the day after I graduated, I couldn't wait to get out of the town. So
that was gonna be my next question. I was assuming that was always the plan, no matter what the plan was, right?
Yeah. The day after I graduated, I threw all my stuff in my car and moved to LA. Like fully convinced I was gonna start the next fucking Zeppelin or something.
Well, wait a minute though, but you said you were interested in film production, right?
Yeah, I decided I kind of had these two spheres of interest where I'm like, well, you know, I'd really like to do something with film, and I'd have to commit to college to do that. Mm-hmm. But also part of me still wanted to do music. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, you know, I'm just going to go for it with music. And if that fails, then I'll do something else maybe.
Was it ever on your mind about the intersection of the two worlds, like film scoring or anything like that?
Yeah, that's partly why I picked LA to go, as I figured, I'm like, well, I mean, the two things that I'm most into, you know, maybe there'll be some opportunity for either one out there.
Sure.
You know, and, you know, maybe I could try to start a band and also, you know, try to work in the film industry in some respect, you know?
Yeah.
And I did like a semester program at Musicians Institute.
Okay.
And I learned a tremendous amount in a short amount of time there. Mm-hmm. The instructors were really, really good. And that gave me like a good infrastructure as far as technique and theory and stuff to build on.
Yeah.
But you know, you have big aspirations when you're 19, and then you kind of get your ego crushed by the world a little bit. And
yeah.
It was way too expensive to live out there and stuff. So
sure.
it was a big adventure. I got to do some cool stuff, you know, had a couple bands that sort of came together that immediately fell apart. I kind of came back, I wound up back in Ohio, kind of disappointed and stuff, started selling appliance parts, but that was also not a bad period because it was, I worked in this sort of small appliance parts warehouse, and I could just bring my guitar to work with me and practice all day. Mm-hmm. And so I just shedded for like 3 years, you know, just, you know, when I wasn't answering the phone or stocking parts or packaging stuff up, I would just be shedding, you know, listening to records, transcribing solos, trying to learn new chords, the whole, you know, just there's no substitute for just doing the work, the homework.
Sure.
You know, that's the boring aspect of being a musician, but even the most badass rock star, you know, even fucking Dimebag did that homework, I guarantee it.
Yeah.
Because you don't get to that level unless you really sit down and knuckle down and learn. Yeah. You know, and that's where the hard learning came in. You know?
I'm sure. You had mentioned pre-internet. Did you have resources for this type of homework that you're talking? Like, you know, were you picking up a regular magazine at the time, or?
Yeah, or guitar chord books. My dad had a lot of that type of thing laying around.
Yeah, that's true.
I could also, you know, borrow some from other people, or a lot of it was chord books, theory books. a lot of it was just like ear training and listening to solos and transcribing them and stuff like that. When I was in my early 20s, I got more into jazz, but also was like put off by the jazz community a little bit, like the sort of snobbery, the inherent snobbery of it and stuff.
Sure.
And you know, and my natural playing style is sort of heavy-handed, which didn't lend itself to that style. So I never got very good at it. Yeah. And so I gravitated more towards rock and blues and heavier styles of music. So
what started the offshoot for jazz, or the interest in jazz? That wasn't anything mentioned throughout your childhood.
I just listened to all kinds of stuff, man.
Yeah.
I was
just
all
trying
over
something
the place. New? Yeah, if I heard something that resonated with me or perked my ear up, I would just go for it. I get like one of my favorite bands of all time is Allman Brothers.
Okay.
And obviously, you know, they've had so many guitar heavyweights in their lineup over the years. And I think I went through a period of time where I was way into Allman Brothers. And obviously, there's an avenue towards jazz in that music.
Yeah.
Because, you know, Dickie and Dwayne were really listening to like Kind of Blue, the Miles and Coltrane stuff to get their guitar interplay down.
Yeah.
And so I guess that was sort of like the offshoot to jazz for me. And then I started listening to it a little bit more. And yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
The blues and rock relationship has always been, I mean, they're inseparable. At some point or another, going back, you're going to find one or the other through one or the other, you know? So, I mean, I could kind of see that.
I think that probably what you're going to find is that the weird thing about doing this interview is that, I mean, for the better part of my adult life, I've played music full time, but I don't reflect on it that much, but I guess my career path is just like totally oddball. It's all over the place.
Yeah.
You know, like everything, I've done everything from like neo soul to country.
Yeah.
You know, like before Drab, the most recent thing I did was with Chapel Hart, which is like an up and coming country band. You know, they went from New Orleans to Nashville. Yeah. And they're doing really well. So
yeah.
And then before that, I was touring with a neo soul artist named Cassie Taylor.
Okay.
Some years ago. So
yeah.
I've never really sat down and had any kind of career path or strategy. It's like, it was always like if it made me feel something, if it resonated with me, I just went for it.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
does in that being said, do you get the itch after a certain period of time? I remember telling my wife my longest relationship before I met her. Right, coming up, you're like, you know, we went together for a year. We were seeing each other for 2 years or something. Like 2 years, and that's it. You know what I'm saying? Like, you get the itch after a while. Until you find what suits you better, I guess, you know. Has there been a certain period of time where you just start to, maybe it's not a set number, but do you get that itch after a while? You know, say you're doing neo soul for 2 or 3 years. Does it start to feel like it's time to venture off, or it just kind of happens naturally?
I guess it just kind of happens naturally. I don't know.
It's a weird question. I mean, you're just kind of following your emotion. You can't really explain that.
Following your muse.
Yeah.
You know, that thing that inspires you. And I guess that's, like I was talking about, that spark and that flame, that's how you keep it lit. Is
absolutely.
You have to follow that voice that's guiding you or inspiring you. And for me, I never really thought about the consequences or what other people thought. You know, like I'm sure when I started doing Drab, or now more recently Garguts, it may have alienated some of the people that knew me because of my blues stuff.
Sure.
But I just don't care. You know,
right.
Like, it's, if you don't do that, I feel like you stagnate, or you start to become a parody of yourself.
Yeah.
Or something.
Yeah,
so.
Stagnation is death. It's my favorite saying.
Exactly.
The 3 years that you were not doing any of this, the 3 years that you were at an appliance parts store, what happened to the spark then? I mean, did you ache a little bit, or did you feel like you kept it alive on your own? Or
yeah. Again, it was like sort of the only way I could keep it alive was to just bring my guitar to work and shed. And I felt like it was kind of depressing, because I felt like, in a way, you know, like I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to do music for a living. I thought I wasn't sure if that ship had sailed, and it was just going to be a hobby, and you know, I was going to have to find a job or go back to school or some bullshit I didn't want to do. And so, but I just kept practicing, you know, kept working.
Sure.
And then eventually, one of my buddies mentioned to me that there was a pretty well-known blues harmonica player in Toledo named Johnny Reed. And he was a Chicago-style blues harp player.
Okay.
Like Paul Butterfield style.
Okay.
And because of my dad's record collection, I was a big fan of Paul Butterfield and Mike Bloomfield, his guitar player. And I heard that he was auditioning guitar players. And one of my buddies, he's a very good guitar player in Austin now. We've sort of had these parallel journeys, you know, coming from Toledo. But he was like, dude, you should really audition because, you know what he's going for. You know the Butterfield stuff back to front. So you know, I think you should audition. And I was too nervous at that time. I was like, nah, I was just shy. Yeah. And finally, I just fucking nutted up and went and auditioned, and he hired me on the spot.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah. And then for the 3 years after that, he kind of became my mentor, really took me under the wing. I mean, talk about like underrated musicians I've worked for. That guy should have like a great career. He's got great stage presence. He's a blues harmonica virtuoso, and really taught me so much about the fundamentals of performing. Yeah. And they were like a regional touring band, and so I was kind of taking like night classes, and at the time, just as a plan B in case whatever else didn't work out. I dropped out of school. I figured,
this is it.
Yeah, this is it, man. Which I attribute. I still say, I don't want to give anybody I don't want to be a bad influence on anybody, but to me, dropping out of school was like the best thing I ever did. Yeah. The best decision I ever made. So I always figured, I can always go back to school, but you can't go back in time and try to join a band and try to play music.
At that moment, yeah.
So that was it. Joined the band, played hundreds of shows a year from that point on, and I learned a tremendous amount. Got a lot of stage time in. Yeah. So it went from the woodshed to the stage, and that was just a great time.
Yeah. That's funny because up until that point, you were heavy on theory, but not on anything else about a performing band and stage presence. Totally. and how you carry yourself on stage and feed off of the crowd or read the crowd. There's a lot that goes into a show that's not even music. Totally. And you weren't really privy to that up until this point, really, right?
Not at all. I guess I had a sense of it from watching other people, but a totally different story being on stage in front of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. Okay. When you left LA, what was the last straw? Like what did it?
It was I didn't have any like super bad experiences. It was more of like a money thing. Even back then it was way too expensive to live there. Couldn't really make ends meet. And I couldn't really get anything together that I felt like met my ridiculously high 19-year-old expectations, Yeah. And so, I just kind of like gave up, It was more like I felt like I had failed or something,
Well, sure. I mean, I'm sure you arrived back home of all places, which doesn't help the ego with a deflated ego, and so the 3 years was like an incubation time. But
you ride off into battle and then you're like, okay, maybe I suck.
Right. Somebody stands in, you're like, oh, wait a minute.
Fuck this, I'm going home.
Yeah. But that had to come alive tenfold when you got this gig.
Yeah, totally. It was like instant. Everything that preceded that moment was like the affirmation. Yeah. Of like, that was the validation of like all that work that came before it.
Not only all the work, but what you suspected you were made of. Right. Because you went there with high hopes, and you kind of felt like nobody got you, but maybe you question yourself after that. You're like, am I really good enough? I don't know. And then this guy takes you on, and then you end up being told, yeah, goddamn right you're good enough, So
it was Yeah, it was a huge moment to have a really well-respected musician in Toledo just instantly on. You know, we played like 2 songs at the audition, and he's just like, "You're the guy."
Yeah.
And I was like, I almost couldn't believe it.
Where was he at in his career at that moment? He was from that area and just starting to form something?
He was really well known in that area and had come up playing with Art and Roman Griswold, who were kind of like Toledo blues legends.
Okay.
And he had a family and stuff like that, and you know, he was touring regionally, and
okay.
You know, it's one of those things where I've known so many extremely talented people that should be more successful than they are, but it's like if it were easy, then everybody would do it.
Right.
You know, if it were easy to be a rock star, then every single motherfucker on the planet would be a rock star.
Yeah.
It's not. Like, it's one of the few industries in the world where there's just no rule book. Like, there's no strategy you can apply that is going to give you an edge. Like, it even less so now, you know, like, where you can just as easily get famous from a TikTok video of your cat as you can, like, you can put out a great album and get nothing.
Yeah.
And then do something ridiculous on TikTok and get wildly famous.
Yeah.
So it makes even less sense now.
Sure. Know? Yeah, you're right. It's you can't even put that into words, because you would think the better the substance, the more the reward, but it's just not the case anymore.
It's not the case. Yeah, it's not the case. I mean, so some of the most talented musicians I've known, you know, were like local cats, man. Some of my biggest influences were people that I just jammed with or became friends with along the way.
Yeah.
You know, they're every bit as much of an influence on my playing as you know, the greats.
Sure.
You know, if not more so.
But you know what? It goes back to what we were speaking about earlier, where the musician views these things through a different set of lenses than the audience. And sometimes the audience fully expects that band on stage to be background for them talking to a friend. Right. And it could be somebody that is phenomenal or was a superstar or is and was everything. You can't place a value on it in any kind of context, money, time, or substance, or any of these things, you know. I think that you as a musician were able to see these things, or even feel them more so, because you had a deeper appreciation for music than some. For some people, music isn't shit. It's just something that's on the radio that they're not paying attention to.
Right.
For others, music is life.
Totally.
You know what I mean? So, but I think you're fortunate in that respect, because you were familiar with this guy. You were familiar with his influences and his catalog and things of that nature. Not only were you familiar with his work, but you had put in a lot of work of your own, and that kind of converged at that moment, you know?
I think that's probably what he saw in me, is that I knew where he was coming from.
Yeah.
And I think I'm hoping that's what impressed him, I'm guessing. Cause you know, my chops weren't the best at that time. So.
How long did that last for you?
I think I played with Johnny for like 3.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
National, this was a national tour?
We toured around. We did some gigs in Canada too. It was sort of like this regional, you know, thing. We got to do some really cool gigs in a blues context. You know, we opened for like Detroit Women of the Blues and Larry McRae and a couple other really cool blues people.
Yeah.
And just a great time, you know. It was a great band with really good musicianship, and I had to play up, especially to Johnny, because I was sort of counterpoint to him. You know, he was like heavyweight. You know, he's intimidating. You know, he had great stage presence, awesome singer, awesome harp player, great showman.
Yeah.
You know, just a all-around great entertainer. And
the bar was set, huh?
yeah, totally. I'm this kind of like a rookie, you know, coming into the fold, and I'm the guy on the other side from Johnny.
Yeah.
And I've got to hold my weight.
Yeah.
And he was really cool about coaching me along, but also, you know, putting me on the spot and making me rise to the occasion.
Sure.
And I guess that's one thing I took away from that experience that I kind of learned about myself, is that I work better under pressure. Like one thing I've noticed, I guess that makes me different from some musicians that I've noticed is that some people kind of get cold feet if they're under the gun. Mm-hmm. I get my best shit when I'm like, when the gauntlet is thrown and I have nowhere to run.
Yeah.
That's when I get my best takes. Mm-hmm. You know?
No better environment to have that trait, I would think, because that was your first thing.
Yeah.
And big at that. So I mean, you had to have that characteristic to stay above water. You know?
So, yeah, I would have washed out pretty quick.
Yeah.
If I had I think many guitar players had before me. I think that was one guitar slot in Toledo that I think every capable guitar player had come and gone in.
Really?
So I feel lucky that I got to play with those guys for like 3.5 years for an extended period of time, and matured a lot through that period.
Yeah. Outside of his kind of coaching you, what else did you learn? Because like we established, a lot of this was things you hadn't been considering before, I guess you would say. You were heavy on the theory, but the stage presence was something new to you too, and the idea that was a thing. What were some of the things that he didn't coach you on that you picked up from that time, maybe on the road, or is there anything that strikes you?
Yeah, there's like the technical stuff of like suddenly like finding yourself on a pretty large outdoor stage, for example, and the parameters of everything are suddenly different. That is nothing like playing in a club, which is nothing like playing in your bedroom or playing at the appliance parts store after hours.
Makes sense.
You know, nothing, completely different. Everything changes.
Yeah.
I mean, like what you're playing is the same, but you know, especially playing outdoors, it sounds way different than playing indoors.
Okay.
That's the type of thing that you can only learn from experience. And I remember playing, I can't remember exactly what festival it was at, but I remember we were on a large outdoor stage, and I remember listening to Johnny soloing. And what occurred to me is that he wasn't just playing his harp. He was playing the whole stage. He was listening to the environment. He was listening to how his tone was coming through the speakers, how it was resonating. I remember being on stage with him and that occurring to me at one moment. It's
what made it occur to you? Was he playing noticeably different from another time that y'all had played?
Yeah. He was taking the environment and making it work. Like he was making adjustments on the fly to make sure his tone was cutting through. And it occurred to me is it's like this isn't the type of thing where you can just sort of rinse and repeat. You know, you go in, set everything up, play it exactly like you did the night before.
Sure.
Especially if you're kind of touring or playing in different clubs from night to night. The parameters are constantly changing.
Yeah.
And if you kind of do what you do every single night, you're not going to get your best performance. And I remember that moment in particular, like you really got to listen. And he could almost make the stage resonate with his instrument. You know, he'd find the tone and the note, and it's like you could feel the whole stage move almost. And that's something I've always aspired. I always keep that in mind. Is like you got to listen.
Yeah.
You can't just be on autopilot up there fucking playing. You've got to really listen to the whole mix.
Yeah.
And find your sonic space in the mix, and yeah.
Sounds like a revelation on mushrooms, dude.
Yeah, totally. It's like
it must have been like a Zen moment where you're like, I get it all.
I get it. Yeah, exactly. Or at least it opened like this whole door up of like, oh, like this is the difference between like heavyweight and bullshit.
So how do you implement that? Did you? I mean,
I'm still trying, man. Like it's
right.
It's tricky. I guess it's something that's elusive. You know, like. I think it's probably this way for every musician, and it's one of the things that keeps you in the game or keeps you striving. It's like chasing the dragon, you know?
Yeah.
Like you'll feel like you'll play a million shows, and at every one, you'll feel like there was a fleeting moment where you were catching air, and that's what you were really fucking getting there.
Yeah.
But it's a fleeting moment, and then it's back to sort of like, you know, walking a tightrope of like, this could fall apart at any moment. You know, my monitor sounds weird, or, you know, like the tempo is slightly dragging or whatever, you know. That's one of the exciting things about live music, even listening to it, is that it's always an imperfect situation. There's an element of chaos to it. Yeah. And that's what makes it exciting. You know, it's never perfect. And so to me, the best live performers are people that can cut through all that bullshit. I mean, you got like, especially if you're a touring band, it's going to be hit or miss with the sound guy, unless you're rich enough to bring your own sound guy. If you're making enough money to bring your own sound guy, then you're good. If not, you know, it's going to be hit or miss with the house sound. Like, how do you put on a good performance if you're not digging the mix on stage? Yeah. Well, the best performers that I've gotten to work with or I've gotten to watch can rise above all that shit and deliver, you know? And that's something I always try to think about. Yeah. Like, you know, there's a million different things I could be bitching about or could be setting us back at any given moment on stage. I'm like, at some point you just got to be like, fuck all of that. You know, how do I cut through?
I mean, it sounds like it dwells heavily or relies heavily on focused reflection. Like, you have to think about what just happened, cut through that bullshit. Yeah. To the moments where you knew something was better than the rest of the time, or better than the rest of you, you know, and then figure out what are the working parts of that? Like, what makes that, you know? Why was it like that?
Why was it like that? Yeah. And then over years of, you know, experience, and you begin to maybe get an understanding, but it's still fleeting, you know? Sure. Like, well, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, maybe you feel it at that moment and maybe you don't. Maybe you feel it afterwards.
Maybe you feel it. You realize, you know, that was the high point of the set. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, man. So, how did that all come to a close? Was that a predetermined tour duration?
No, I felt like I'd kind of gotten everything that I could have gotten out of the experience, and then my older sister at the time, lived in Denver, and I think her and her boyfriend had split up, and she had a free room in her house, and she said, you know, like, I need help paying the rent, so you want to move up here and check it out? And I'm like, I felt like I was ready for something different. Yeah. And I'd never been to Denver, thought I'd go check it out. So that was like, I split with the band, moved to Denver. Like, that was sort of opened up a whole new chapter of playing music up there, and met a bunch of really cool musicians from there that were big influences on me too. Yeah. Yeah.
That was an abyss to jump into, because you didn't know what was on the other end of that, really.
Totally. Yeah, I just knew it was time to move on from Toledo in some respect.
Sure.
Yeah.
And once you arrived out there, did you have any plan? Like, you know, what did you think was going to be in your life at that point?
I just wanted to, I didn't have any big expectations. I just wanted to absorb some new music. That's it. Sure. And I was just hungry for play with some new people, learn from some new people, hear some new stuff. And it was definitely a bigger pond. Yeah. And so there was a lot of talent up there too. And I wound up, I think that's when I started singing and I formed my own band. Okay. Like, I hadn't done that previously, you know? Okay. And I was playing a lot of like blues rock type stuff there. Okay. And
around what year are we talking?
This would have been like 2008 to, I think I moved to New Orleans in 2013. Okay. So from that time period.
From 08 to 13, and you said 3 years prior was with touring with the band. Yeah. Okay, just trying to get a general timeline. I'm willing to bet, though, when you moved to Colorado, your aspirations were a little bit more humble than when you moved to LA.
They were realistic. I had an idea of what life is like as a real working musician. Sure. Without all, like, you know, the glamour or the sort of ego-based fantasy world, you know.
There's a lot of glitter on the outside.
There's a lot of glitter on the outside, and I guess I knew that I could do it. I'm like, yeah, I can make a living as a musician, or I can get some pretty cool gigs, you know.
Sure.
You know, it's not going to be rock star shit, but I can, you know, get in a cool band and, you know, hopefully make a decent living doing it, you know. That became the goal at that point. It's
yeah,
like,
you didn't have to worry as much about, I guess, a level of confidence.
Right. Once you've proven to yourself that you can do this, then you're like, okay, well, how do you set about, you know, actually paying the bills doing it?
Yeah.
You know, and I guess I was fortunate enough to stay working, and I think I attribute that partly to just being open-minded enough and familiar enough with different styles of music that I could always find a gig, you know.
What were you doing when you first got there that you're talking about?
When I first moved there, I had to have a day job to get by, and I worked at like a mountain bike shop, like assembling and kind of repairing mountain bikes. And then I got a gig I got a couple gigs in the blues scene mostly. You know, that's what's interesting about any city you go to is if you have a good background in blues and you know a lot of blues standards, you can throw together a combo. You can throw together a little trio, play in any bar in the city, make $150 a guy. You know, you can pretty much do that anywhere if you have enough background in that style of music.
Yeah.
And so I started doing that, and then one thing led to another. I did some other odd gigs too. I played at played a couple Celtic festivals with a Native American violinist named Arvel Bird, who's really unique and talented and really wonderful, nice guy too. So it was just kind of, you know, I was just taking whatever I could, living hand to mouth to try to make a living as a musician, and eventually got a gig playing with a girl named Cassie Taylor, who's the daughter of Otis Taylor, who's a pretty well-known blues musician. And I think from 2010 to 2012 or 2013, I toured with her. We toured in Europe, toured all over the States, all over Canada, playing like neo soul type stuff.
Yeah.
So just tumbleweed, picking up different styles of music, different gigs. Always fortunate enough to be working. You know?
Sure. How would you put this? Were your studies and theory, either on your own or in school, like in LA or something, were your studies and theory of the same variety as your taste in music? In other words, you had always been up front from the beginning of this, talking about how your father liked many different styles of music, so it was onto you that you liked many different styles of music and added a few of your own affinities along the way, like you know, heavy metal and things of that nature. In the books, what were you looking at in the books? Did it allow you to be able to play just anything? Because at this point, and we've covered a lot of territory, but at this point, you're playing anything.
Yeah. I think the advantage to knowing theory is it's kind of like learning another language, and then it makes it easier to communicate with other musicians about what to play and how to play it.
Yeah.
I guess in a real world situation, I mean, there's a lot about theory that in a working musician's life is like completely fucking useless.
Well, yeah, you mentioned
like,
jazz, and everybody points out like none of those guys who started that knew how to play anything. I mean, read anything.
Right, exactly. There's very, very little of it in a real working situation that you're going to actually apply. But it's very, very useful if you know, if you're very familiar with chord changes, and how the harmony and the melody relate, and different kinds of drum grooves and that kind of thing. It becomes much easier to pick things up almost by osmosis, because you're not fighting with what you're hearing versus what the technically how to play it.
It translates better, I guess.
Totally. Yeah. You have a sense of like you hear it first, and you have the tools that you need to play it then.
The books that you were into from your father's shop or elsewhere, Were they in any genre or vein, or was it just the rudiments?
Mostly rudiments. I remember there's a book by Pat Martino, the jazz guitar player, where he shows a lot of chord inversions and stuff. And a lot of the chord voicings that I would use, I borrowed heavily from that. There's something called fretboard logic, or the caged system, that I learned that, and that gave me a lot of accelerated learning. I know this is getting super like wonky and technical about guitar.
Cool. All different types listen to this, you know?
Yeah, totally. But once I learned those patterns, you know, it became easier to learn scales and chord voicings all over the neck. And then, you know, that just sort of opens up the possibilities of what you can play. Yeah. And then the rest of it is just, I guess, applied knowledge of, like, there's practice and then there's performance.
Sure.
And, you know, the more people that you're performing with, or the more situations you're putting yourself in, and where you can apply the things you've been practicing, then you're like, okay, this works, this doesn't. Yeah. You know, this is how I get around this. You know, like, I think every working musician has like a bag of tricks or a toolbox.
Sure.
That they can, you know, just like, you know, a painter is going to have their toolkit too.
Yeah.
You know, they'll use this brush for this thing, or, you know,
sure.
whatever. So.
Yeah, heavily, because it'll bleed through so much to where people can pick out who, I think that guy is such and such on guitar. Let me go see. And then because you have your own style at that point, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Now, like, obviously, in this period of my life, I didn't really have like any aspiration outside of just being a hired gun and being able to pay my rent.
Yeah.
And so that's what I was doing, was like, you know, just gunslinger shit. You know, somebody needed a guitar player and I fit the bill, I'd jump on the gig. You know, some bands I played with for an extended period of time, sometimes it was like one-off type stuff.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's partly what led me to New Orleans, because there's, if you're that type of musician, there's a plethora of gigs to play.
Sure.
You know, some of the best musicians I know in town are kind of hired guns like that, you know.
How did that differ from what you were looking to do, or what you thought you wanted to do when you had moved out to LA? You had a different idea then, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like I went hard in the other direction, of like from sort of adolescent rock star fantasy to hardworking real world musician.
Yeah.
Like, how do I actually make a living doing this shit? You know.
Yeah.
And then eventually finding a happy medium between the two, where, you know, I could pay the bills and also, you know, play more creative stuff and express myself more, and like play my original music and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know.
We had spoke earlier about kind of a focused reflection. When you look back on yourself at that time and age, moving to LA, can you see why certain things didn't work? And how much of that do you attribute to yourself, and how much do you attribute to your surroundings at the time?
Yeah, it's funny, because in a way I feel like I like secretly haven't actually given up. Like, I'm 39 now, and I'm still like, somewhere in me is still that 19-year-old kid who wants to take over the world.
Absolutely, so, absolutely. Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
For the parts that didn't work, though, I guess, when you look back on that time, can you see?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
In yourself. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
There was a lot that needed adjusting. Yeah.
That's funny, man. You're so twice you get a gig with a fairly well-known touring band. How much time are you given in those two instances to prepare? Because they were already in progress when you came on, correct? They existed before you. It wasn't something that was about to happen. It was already happening.
That's an interesting question, because I remember when I auditioned for Cassie, she played bass and piano and sang. Uh-huh. And the day before the audition, she sent me an EP with like 4 or 5 songs on it, but there were no guitar parts on it. Ah. It was just her, a drummer, playing bass, a drummer, and her singing.
Yeah.
And so I had to sit down kind of the night before the audition, and like, I'm like, I guess I'm gonna have to come up with guitar parts for these songs. you know?
Yeah.
And I did my best. I did what I would do in this. I did what I thought sounded good.
Sure.
And I remember at the audition, we just sat down acoustic, and she liked some of it, and other things she instructed me to do differently. And that kind of started a working relationship that was pretty copacetic, you know, for the next 2 years.
Yeah.
And I think, again, what benefited me in that situation was just being semi-fluent in a lot of different styles of music.
Yeah.
So that I was sort of jumping from platform to platform without falling through the cracks.
Yeah.
Or being totally stumped.
Yeah.
By any, you know, anything that was sort of like any curveballs that were thrown at me.
That must have been a good feeling, though, because you came into that situation kind of personally vested, so to speak, because you got to put a bit of yourself into what you were about to do.
Totally.
Yeah. That wasn't the case. I keep forgetting the harmonica dude's name. I'm sorry.
Oh, Johnny Reed, yeah.
Johnny Reed. That wasn't the case because you said in that situation, a lot of the guys in the area, a lot of guitar players in the area at one time or another had been in that slot. So
yeah,
that was kind of play this. This wasn't, right?
Yeah, in that band, it was like people had already sort of put their stamp on it in some regard. And also they were drawing from a particular well of Chicago blues.
Okay.
So like I had a reference point for what to do.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I could say when I started playing with Cassie, not so much. Like I had an idea, but those things were discussed later on. You know? Yeah.
I interviewed a singer at one point, and she had transitioned from a band that was kind of a toxic atmosphere, kind of controlling, to where, you know, if she said we need to drop it down, I can't go that high with it, they would tell her, no, you know, shut the hell up. And so she transitions from that sort of atmosphere to a band that welcomes her input and welcomes her, you know, call and response in speaking after practice or after a performance and things of that nature. And I remember kind of feeling with her while she was talking to me about it, how it was so much more comfortable and put her at ease so much more to be in an environment that welcomed her input. And that's why I'd asked you about this second situation, even though it was something totally different from Chicago blues being neo soul. But the very first question you were asked was, you know, what would you do in this situation? Which is kind of flips you on end, you know? Yeah,
I mean, you feel much less stifled,
sure,
or like bound, to you know, like you know, within a bandwidth.
Sure.
But like, there's also part of it that's scary because it's like, well, I don't want to do the wrong thing. You know, I don't want to go out on a limb and like totally do the wrong thing and get fired or something.
You don't even know what's wrong at that point.
You don't even know what wrong is.
Yeah.
So like you could do something that you totally think is right that could completely.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah.
So which sometimes happened. You know,
yeah.
But you know, yeah, that's life as a musician too. You know,
yeah.
You can't win them all.
That was so that experience, was that 2 or 3 years, you said?
It's like 2.5 years, I think. Yeah.
2.5 years.
Got to do a lot of really fun stuff. You know, we got to tour. We toured Europe really heavily. Got to see some amazing sights, play on some amazing stages, meet some really cool people. You know, It's magic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so how did that one come to an end?
Again, you know, the things sort of reached their peak and wane, and then she married the tour manager who was her fiance at the time, and they started a family, and then she kind of took I think about an 8-year hiatus after that.
Oh wow.
I think she may have done some shows in and around that period, but you know, everybody sort of went their separate ways, did other things. I started focusing more on by then I was living in New Orleans and wasn't playing an awful lot locally, and because I was on the road so much that I didn't really have a chance to get to meet people or network here.
Right, establish a relationship.
Sort of start to set up shop. So after that dissipated, I focused more on that, and, you know, and I really wanted to do my own thing this time. I want to start my own band.
Yeah.
You know, start recording my own music, you know.
In both instances, though, the environment somewhat kind of urged you to move on, though, right? I mean, it wasn't, you weren't forced out, you didn't get fired or quit. It was always amicable, things of that nature. So, I mean, all that aside, you were kind of, I guess you'd say, reading the writing on the wall, like they say, you know? I mean, things kind of reached an apex and then...
Again, you know, if you stay in situations too long, it starts to, you know, that stagnation kicks in.
Yeah.
And, you know, I feel like everything has a lifespan. Some bands, you know, they keep the fire lit for years and years and years and years. And like,
sure.
That's fucking awesome. You know, it's really an amazing thing.
Yeah.
You know, or, you know, I often think about like bands like, just throw out an example like Pink Floyd. Like for most bands to produce something like Dark Side of the Moon, to even get a really great song is a huge accomplishment.
Yeah.
Then to have a great album is like exponentially more impressive.
Yeah.
And then to have a whole catalog of amazing albums is almost like only the most narrow percentile of musicians get to that place.
Sure.
So like it just depends, really. You know, it just depends. But yeah, I guess you know, the trade winds blow, and then you move in another direction sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why New Orleans?
I think what happened was I was getting kind of tired of Denver. It was, you know, it was just starting to look more and more like just a sprawling suburb to me. Which I still have. It's like my second home in a way, so I still have a special place in my heart for it. But I went on vacation to New Orleans, and it was so radically different from anywhere else I'd ever been. In many ways, complete opposite to Denver. Denver's a mountain. This is a swamp.
Sure.
You know, like, and this is anything but a sprawling suburb. So, and especially growing up in rural Ohio, you know, and I'd always had like a fascination with New Orleans, especially because, you know, it's the root of all American music.
The reputation.
Yeah, and so you can't get into a bunch of different styles of music without the word New Orleans cropping up repeatedly.
Sure.
You know, like repeatedly, you'd hear about the influence of New Orleans on all the different music you're listening to, no matter what genre.
Yeah.
You know, it all kind of like eventually leads back to one place.
Yeah.
So, but I remember I went on vacation here, immediately loved it, and not too long after that, you know, just kind of moved on a whim.
Yeah.
Didn't really know anybody, and just set up shop. And again, I was touring a lot at the time, so I didn't get a chance to experience the music scene quite yet until like maybe 2013, 2014. Uh-huh. You know, I started networking with local musicians, started picking up different gigs, played a lot of different gigs. You know, I just kind of like, again, got into that mode of just absorbing whatever came at me. I'm like, I wanted to play with the brass bands, and I wanted to play, you know, I heard some great R&B singers, and I wanted to play with them, and, you know, and I feel fortunate enough that I got to like check a lot of those boxes. You know?
Absolutely. Indigenous music. What is that like in Colorado, in Denver? Is there something that's native to Denver in the music department?
Nothing like here, man. But you know, that's pretty much anywhere. I think what was really popular at the time in Denver was, or that I was sort of adjacent to, was like the jam band type stuff.
Okay.
Which you know, I've always been a huge Allman Brothers fan, so you know, if I can get into 15-minute guitar solos in that context for sure. I love it.
Sure.
So, but definitely nothing like the indigenous music here.
Yeah.
You know, it's a different animal.
I lived in North Glen. You know where that's at?
Yeah. Okay.
For like 3 months.
Right. Yeah.
I was like fresh out of high school, and the girl I was seeing moved up there, and I'm like, you know what, fucking, I'm gonna move up there too. So I go up there not knowing nothing, and like, the only thing I could say about it is that, and I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but everything around me seems so incredibly manicured.
Oh yeah.
Which can be, I guess, a plus in some respects, but in others it lacks character, if that makes sense, you know?
A lot of beige.
Yeah, yeah, whitewashed world, man. So, so moving here appealed to you aesthetically? I mean, musically, you knew you were open to the idea, but
yeah.
I mean, coming from such a cookie cutter world, so to speak, up there, did this kind of reflect the environment that you wanted to see yourself in? Did it
Hell
seem
yeah.
of interest?
Oh yeah, I loved everything about it. It's my favorite city in the world, man.
Yeah.
I love everything about it. Love the food, love the people, love the music, love the atmosphere, everything.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like it takes a particular kind of savage to live here, but I am that savage. I feel like it's in my DNA in a way. Like, some of us belong here.
Yeah.
I feel like I belong here. So.
Yeah, I feel like when I'm too far away from here, I can see it, hear it, and smell it in every person, even if they just say hello. I just know that was a Yankee hello. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. It's just kind of, I don't know. My wife has tried to get us to move to Arizona, where she's from, and I'm like, I would, some part of me would die inside, man. And there's no other way that I could put it. And that sounds dramatic, but I'm not being dramatic.
Yeah.
You know?
It feels like when I leave now, it feels like it's like the volume is turned down.
Yeah.
Or it's like if you're watching a movie and you turn the color down. It's
so
like until it's like sort of like dreary.
Yeah.
That's how I feel when I leave New Orleans. It's like the color gets turned down on everything.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, okay. Boring.
So, well, then that makes me ask the question, do you feel like Garguts or Drab is a band that could have been started in Denver? Or would it just not be, obviously it wouldn't be the same animal.
No.
What would they be if it wasn't Drab and Garguts in New Orleans? What would it be in Denver? Would it be Allman Brothers Z, or like, you know?
Man, that's a tough question. Yeah, it's kind of like
I guess it's like saying what if, and who knows that
what
answer.
if and who knows. Yeah, I could be a completely different person if I hadn't left. So
yeah,
but
I don't think you would have had. I think you would have lacked the inspiration to to start something as you have, because for you, moving has been an inspiration, I feel like.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and
I think especially with Drab, a lot of that had to do with the right people coming together. Mm-hmm. Like Jack Mealy, for example.
Sure.
Like he was instrumental to that album. Like his production skills were instrumental to like bringing this idea that I had to life, making it happen.
Yeah.
So without him, I don't think Drab would exist, or at least it would be like a shadow of what I feel like it is, or what it's becoming.
Yeah.
You know, Drab is still a pretty new band, so it's changed. You know, it's sort of metamorphosed already in a really great way. You know, I feel like we're going somewhere. I just don't know where yet.
Sure,
so,
but that's part of the appeal, I would imagine, right?
Totally, yeah.
Yeah. Could you give us a rundown of the roster, the current roster, who's playing what?
Yeah, Casey Fritas on bass, and he also plays with Adam Pierce, who's a really great singer from this area. Yeah. And Aaron Levy on drums, and Jacob Fitzmaurice on second guitar, and then myself.
Okay.
The Drab began as a trio, but almost every song when we recorded it had a second guitar part. And so when I was sort of putting together the live band, it made sense to have another guitar. You know, it sounded better, it fills out the sound. Yeah. And it enables me to like sort of offload some guitar duty so that I'm not doing this fucking juggling act of like singing, playing, switching pedal, like, you know. Yeah. It just sounds more balanced with two guitars for sure.
I guess it's I'm asking you to predict the future. But so knowing you and knowing your character, lust sounds dramatic, but you kind of have a lust for something new. What's next? Maybe it takes a year or two or three for that to manifest itself enough in you for you to make that move. But my question is this: can we expect that from Drab? Can we expect Drab to change and kind of evolve its soundscape over time, because people like you don't like to sit in the same place for too long, you know?
Totally.
Is that something that interests you for its direction in the future, I guess I should say?
Yeah, we're going into the studio again next month to record some new stuff, which is it's quite a bit different than the first album. Good. It's not like a total stylistic change. You know, we're not like making a leap of faith into something else. But the sound is definitely evolving. It's getting meaner, darker, heavier. Yeah.
The current album that's out now, will it have the same people playing, or did you add people in the span between the last album and what you're about to record?
The last single we recorded, Blacklight, the newest addition to the band from that point is Casey on bass.
Okay.
So yeah, the next couple songs we record will have him on them.
Okay.
And I feel like this lineup is what it naturally took shape. Like, this is what Drab is supposed to sound like.
Yeah.
You know?
That's good. That's excellent, man.
Yeah.
A little bit about Garguts for everybody.
Yeah. Basically, Dylan Hemmard from Green Gasoline, one night we were just hanging out talking guitar, and he approached me about, like, you ever think about doing some like sludge metal type shit, some real New Orleans like sludge metal type stuff? And I'm like, yeah, I'd love to. I'd kind of experimented with like more extreme vocal styles, and it was something I wanted to try. I wanted to like take my voice and push it in every conceivable direction I could to really see where the limit is. And so I'm like, totally, let's do it. We started jamming. It's Sterling Anderson on bass, John K-Sticks from Green Gasoline on drums, and almost immediately just started writing songs, like super organic and fun.
Yeah.
Like Garguts rehearsals we just joke around the whole time. Though somebody will come up with funny lyrics and we'll just extrapolate a song from it on the spot. I feel great not having to play guitar because, with Dylan around, it's not like I'm going to play anything better. So like with a guitar player that good in the room, I'll just toss the ball to them, let them play.
All right, so you're strictly vocals.
That's strictly vocals, yeah. That's another thing that's new, is like the first time I've ever been in a band where I just sing.
Yeah.
And man, I love it. I'm having a blast.
Because you said you had experimented with some different vocal styles in the past. Like, what does that look like logistically, like physically? What are you doing? Are you at home rehearsing, trying, or did you try in the presence of a full band? Like, what do you do to experiment with your own vocals?
I feel like I've played guitar for like more than half of my life, but started singing much later. And it's just like learning another instrument, where it takes years and years and years of molding it until you feel like you've found your voice.
Yeah, I was going to use that turn of phrase, finding your own voice.
Finding your own voice.
I get that, yeah.
I guess when I first started singing in my own band, it was more like blues, R&B, rootsy kind of music. I was mostly just yelling in that band too. And then I got better and better at yelling and screaming.
Yeah.
And I guess in Drab, it's more of a hard rock vocal style, like classic rock to hard rock vocal style.
Okay.
I don't consider myself the most technically adept singer. Like, I'm trying to get better at it. It's again something I'm constantly trying to improve. But I think Garguts gave me the opportunity to unleash, like really unleash, both in terms of expression and in terms of just trying to see where I can push my voice.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I've always been a huge fan of metal, and if you asked me like 10 years ago, would you ever see yourself fronting a metal band? I'd be like, oh, I'd love to, but I don't know if I can do it. I wasn't sure that I had the vocal capability to do it.
Yeah, but that's funny because I would say the mainstay of your experience, or what taught you the biggest lessons up until this point, have not been in that genre.
Right.
Or in that atmosphere at all.
It's odd.
It's funny to say.
I know.
Well, it's funny to say that these experiences would give you the confidence to do that when they're kind of related, but not really, especially not in a vocal sense, Yeah.
And I guess I think how this all started is I mentioned to Dylan kind of jokingly that like when I'm around the house, I like scream at the cats like metal style.
Sure, they love that.
Yeah, they're used to it by now. They just look at me like, it's,
nice.
That's Steve, So, and I think that's what triggered in his mind, like, well, you want to try to start a band?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Fuck it. Let's get in a room, jam, and see what comes of it. You know? And if it's not happening, it's not happening. Whatever. We're all still friends. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. So there's like zero blueprint,
and it clicked immediately.
Yeah.
So just off to the races.
Sure.
And like I said, we had our first show at Parasite last Friday.
Yeah.
And I could tell. I mean, that was one of the most fun shows I've played in a long time. So really excited about the future of the Garguts for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The implementation of the business side of music, which is an abhorrent turn of phrase there. What does that mean to you? Is there some, none? Do you not concern yourself with it? Is it something you hand off to somebody else, or do you have kind of a framework in your mind? What needs to be done? Just kind of to keep up to par, I suppose?
I guess if a person wants to be a working musician, or is this something you want to do as a career, especially these days, you have to have a business sense.
Absolutely.
You totally have to, even if it's like pulling teeth and it's like not what you want to be doing as a musician, and it's a completely different part of your brain than the creative process of making music and playing music with people.
Yeah.
You kind of have to. You kind of have to learn a bit about it. And I guess for me, it's like I've learned what not to do over time. I feel like I have a better sense of what not to do, which is at least half of it.
Sure.
Like I don't know if I feel like if I had better business sense, maybe some bands I've been in the past would have been more successful or like done some more, but who knows?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I've never really thought beyond being able to pay the bills and playing with people that I enjoy being around and enjoy playing music with. And if the shows are kick-ass, then I'm there.
Yeah. I'm just curious because it is, and you put it best, it's a different part of the brain.
It is a different part of the brain.
It's the other half,
Yeah. Especially nowadays. I mean, I feel like at some point the music industry as it was just sort of like fell apart into this wasteland of like social media. Social media kind of drives music now, unfortunately. I think, in my opinion, that's not the best place to be in. And streaming services and this kind of thing and algorithms, and it's a completely different animal where back when it used to be sort of market driven or driven by people's taste, and there were a lot of underground markets and underground scenes happening. It's way different right now, and I feel like it's not. The music industry right now is very chaotic.
Sure.
It used to be sort of like record labels that more or less called the shots and patronized the artist and grew them and built them and
Well, it's being forced to change at the pace of technology, which is exponential in itself, so it's hard to keep up. There is no normalcy. There is no sense of normalcy. And I will point out, too, that technology, because of what it enables people to do, I'll put it to you like this, man. Without it was a vetting process in itself. In other words, you could want to play, kinda, but you didn't feel like going to raise money to get some studio time or something. Well, now you could kind of want to play and still record and publish it and put it out there, but just clicking a few buttons, and it doesn't cost half as much, so there's no vetting process for people like that.
Yeah.
So now there's this oversaturation of just published music in general, whereas maybe 20, 30 years ago, half those losers wouldn't have done that shit because it took too much gumption to do it. You see what I'm saying?
Totally.
So you have people like you that are now forced to contend with people that maybe should have spent a few more years practicing and honing their craft before they put something out. Right. But their drop is the same day as yours on all platforms. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you said it best when you talk about like oversaturation. How on the one hand, like all this digital media, the good thing about it is it enables people to produce the music the way they want to from home. You know, you can make a studio quality album from home. That's cool. The bad thing is that we're like completely oversaturated with like shit.
Yeah.
You know, like, and you have to rifle through all this nonsense, like noise.
You really do.
To find something good as a listener, you know, and it's even as a musician even harder to cut through that noise and find your mark, find your audience.
Yeah.
Because everybody's so like gaga with like TikTok videos and just nonsense. You know? And another thing I've noticed is...
I'm sorry, go ahead, man.
Yeah. The only other thing I've noticed is like... somebody sent me like... Something that's trending on TikTok is like bad cooking videos. Where people will cook something terrible on purpose. And because the only goal here is to get likes and upvotes and retweets and shares and views. Like that's the currency of social media.
Yes.
And so what that means is that somebody cooking complete garbage with no thought into it for shock value is getting put on the same level of value as somebody a really great chef who's worked for years cooking something really, really amazing.
That's wonderful.
So in the market of TikTok and social media, these two things are held in equal esteem, if not the bad thing being more overvalued.
Yes, that's funny.
And it's the same with music now.
Well, I mean, it's a shame. It's funny. It's funny because it's ridiculous, but it is a shame.
Yeah.
I was going to say that it's kind of ironic that as a musician that puts out a finished piece of work, you're up against an algorithm. You're hoping to trigger something in your favor. And it's funny because these are the same, or at least the sources are, the same algorithms that curate everything that people see.
Yep. And
if I clicked on one country music video while I was on Facebook once, even if it was by accident, they're going to show me more country artists. You know, maybe of that same caliber, in that same vein, or maybe in that same town because that was a show that occurred in Denver. You know what I'm saying? But we're separated by this invisible membrane, and we're all fighting to get to each other just to form a connection. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
How ironic is that?
Yeah. Totally right about that. As somebody who's producing music in this day and age, it's increasingly the concern when you release a single or an album is whether you're checking the boxes of the algorithm.
Yeah.
And I hate that.
Yeah,
like,
you gotta play by their rules for sure.
Like, fuck that shit.
Yeah.
Like I want to make real music and I want to listen to real music.
Yeah.
I don't want, but unfortunately, if you upload something to a streaming service, and the algorithm is going to push it out to the front if it checks the algorithm's criteria.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, it's going to get moved to the back, regardless of how good it is.
Yeah, you won't know.
And I think we're kind of entering into that era of the music business. We're kind of in the beginning of it, I feel like. And I it might get worse. But also, I think it might have the inverse effect of making enough people sick of that that they turn it all off and like start going to shows again. Start going to local shows, start trying to find underground bands.
Absolutely.
I'm hoping, I think it will. Like,
there has to be like I know it sounds corny, but like a grassroots upheaval. Basically, for sure. So where people tell everybody where they can find your real ass music at today?
Yeah, we just released the Garguts EP. It's on all the streaming services. Or you could hit us up and, we'll send you a CD or a download. Drabnola.com. You can check out what we've got coming up, the shows that we've got coming up. The next Garguts show, the next Drab show is this weekend in Ponchatoula at the Hitch with a band called Them Guys, good friends of ours. The next Garguts show is October 29th at the Goat.
All right.
So I'd say come out to a show, have a beer,
What can you lose, right?
What can you lose? Well, you lose some hearing. But,
there you go. That's cool, man. Well, thank you for your time.
Thanks a lot.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.